Are we rolling, Bob? 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Well, I finally got the damn thing working, and everyone was waiting in the previous one, and now I'm going to wait till some people find the way here because it just was not working. I'll get it all set up, scheduled to go at 2:30, and something would go wrong. The first time Chrome lost its connection to my HDMI thing. Second time, had it all set up, was looking great, scheduled it, and then it went away. And I saw it scheduled, showed that it was supposed to start, but I could not get into it. So I'm still figuring out how it works on this end of things. But we seem to be here pretty much in real time together. Hey guys, thanks for joining me, David S. and Dan Pfeiffer and Sander. Thanks, man. Thank you all for joining me. Does it sound okay? I can't use the lav mic for this because HDMI stuff. Does it look okay? Sound okay? And I also don't know what kind of lag we have here. Good. All right. Well, I'm going to wait for a few more people to show up because there were like 18 people waiting for the previous one. Yeah, we're getting there now. All right. So this is an old PV Butcher, and I've got it kind of prepped for the work I'm going to do. We're going to be recapping it to start with and changing out the grid stoppers here on the output tubes. And greetings from Honolulu, greetings from Scotland, Amsterdam, very nice. A good bunch of people here. Welcome, welcome to my little corner of the world. So like I said, this is a PV Butcher, and I'm going to try to spend equal time interacting with you guys and answering questions as I can with doing the work, but the screen's over to my right and the work's here in front of me, so I can't do everything. The first thing I'm going to do is just disconnect a few more of these secondaries so I can pull this board up. This little tag board here has the LEDs, and find the bit that will handle these hex screws. I believe it's 1/4 inch. And if I miss a question, it's not that I'm tuning you out, it's I'm trying to do this while working. Later, I will do a Q&A, a live Q&A video where I will be focusing just on questions and all that fun stuff. And for that, I'll have a mic set up. One of the reasons I did this today, and I'm doing it pretty much just talking a bit while I work, a la Brad, is I wasn't sure if the technology would work. So I figured if it's going to crash and burn, let it be on a Tuesday afternoon rather than some more momentous occasion. And one of the little screws is floating around inside the chassis. That happens. I'll fish it out in a moment. As you've seen me say in many other videos, it's really important that you have the right hardware for each little bit of the task. Let's see if this will flip up enough for us to access everything. Yeah, good. There's that extra screw. So let me see what I've missed while doing that. Rainy Toronto, and assuming not rainy Phoenix. Yeah, thanks for putting me on to Brad. It seemed like this format was enticing. Yeah, Brad's a lot of fun to watch. Great knowledge and, you know, a true vulgarian. Makes me jealous. Hey, from Munich, Bavaria, very nice. I'll be in Vienna next spring, which, you know, I know it's not Germany, but it's as close as I'll probably get for a while. Scotland, I want to go very much. Manchester, I want to go very much. I can't control the video quality because I'm streaming. So it's going to be a variable bit rate. I've got a very high internet connection speed, and I'm doing this over HDMI, so it should be a little bit okay, but I can't really control it. Boston, I was in Cambridge back in the day. Windsor, Ontario, very nice. All right, so on these caps here, the string of caps, it's very nice. All the positives on this end, except for these two, all the positives are here. So let's just start disconnecting them. I've snipped one side, and just a matter of working the leads loose a little bit so they can push through. It's really hard to do this while people are talking over there. I don't see how Brad gets used to it. I guess Brad just ignores us. He's good at that. But basically what I want to do on these is just push the leads through and up. Out of the solder as much as possible. Sometimes they don't want to play along. There he goes. Then I can snip these ends off, if I can find my snippers, and pull the caps out without damaging the pads at all. Now, in this case, these pads are giant planes, so I wasn't really going to damage them anyway. But it's good practice and save your butt with a fender reissue. In the trash with those, and just push the other ends out. Let's see, it feels like it's right there. Now this old butcher from the 90s, the solder is leaded, so I don't have to worry about mixing dissimilar solders. On newer amps that use lead-free, I have to remove all the lead-free before I can put in what I consider the good stuff. And I use Custer 6040. For the most part, I use the 0.032. I've got a roll of the larger stuff, but I find the 0.032 is better for most of the connections I'm making. Where'd my braid go? There's a lot of stuff in my regular videos that I edit out. A lot of, where'd my goddamn thing go? And for some reason I've been plagued by lip smacks. I have to edit each one out. All right, here's the brand new thing of braid. Let's see. No, PV does not employ the same designer as Mesa. And while I have some differences of opinion with the 5150 guys, and I've spoken to that guy, I can't remember his name right now, Mr. Brown, I believe. We agree to disagree on some aspects of it. At the same time, he was designing that to a budget. There are things he probably wished he could have done on that were voted down by management. So when I design an amp, I am management, and I don't have to answer to anyone except the client. But you know, if you're designing something that has to cost the company no more than X amount to make, that's when you run into problems. And sometimes those problems exhibit 20 years later, like a lot of the problems on 5150s. And sometimes those problems exhibit within a few years, like you would get on most Fender reissues and blues. I'm going to do these three caps first, so I remember what goes where. And I've got all the caps here. So we're going to use these Vichy for the 220 63 volts. And that's pretty tight fit, but it'll be just fine. And these are just right at the edge of where I would use silicone. I think I'm going to use silicone on these just to be safe because it's cheap. And you'll never regret giving it a little extra support. Did I say silicone or silicone? People correct me for that. So one of the other problems I have is most of my videos are stream of consciousness. I'm just talking as I go, and I'm talking in an empty room, and sometimes I just speak. When it's critical, I'll correct myself with little text additions to the video. I let the little stuff go. Life is short. Yesterday, in the video on the, what do you call it? Matchless Spitfire, I called a Switchcraft plug a jack. I mixed up jack and switch. I do know the difference. I have to walk over here. I forgot to get one of the caps out. But didn't feel like correcting myself on such an obvious minor misstatement. But I know there are people out there waiting to pounce on every little mistake and flaw. Let's see. As a young person looking to get into the next level of amplifier repair and design, do you have any recommendations of hidden gem must-have books? Yeah. Though I'm away from my my lists, the Jack Dar book is great. Volume 4 of the Radiotron user guide is out there, available for free PDF. That's the best place to start, really. Google Radio Designer Handbook version 4 PDF. And that's what almost everyone who did this back in the day started off with. It explains how things work and why people made design decisions that they did. What's the best way to put this? Sometimes people ask me, how can you work on this? How can you work on that? How can you work on this and that? They're very different amps. And pretty much 90% of all guitar amplifier design comes down to the following two questions. What are the requirements necessary for a triode to work? And what are the requirements necessary? What are the conditions you must meet for a pentode to work? And if you understand that, that is most of the work right there. How does a triode work? That's a 12AX7, 12AU7, AT7. How does a pentode work? That's a 6L6. That's an EF86. There are all kinds of stuff out there that fall into those main categories. And you need to learn what that means. Then you get into things like, what's the difference between a 12AU7 and an AX7? One is a voltage amplifier. One is a current amplifier. What does that mean? When would I use one versus the other? That's when you get a little bit more into the weeds. But it's amazing when I look at guitar amp builders on forums and the questions that they ask, how few people have taken the time to learn how does a triode work? You know, just what does a plate resistor do? What does a cathode resistor do? What is a cathode bypass cap doing? How do I calculate that? And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the more you know, the more you can do. Now, in this case, I'm using a radial rather than an axial, just because there aren't a lot of good radials in this necessary value out there. Sorry, there aren't a lot of good axials in this value out there. And this is a very high quality Nishikon radial. And just don't tell anyone. We've got some modern stuff happening in this old butcher. Electronically, they'll be very, very happy this way. Now, as you've seen me do in a lot of videos, especially on the Fender reissues and blues and hot rod stuff, once I get the lead through, I like to bend it over and give it an actual mechanical crimp before soldering. That way the solder is not mechanical force holding everything together. We're not using solder as a kind of glue. It's going to keep the metal from oxidizing and just promote a good electrical connection without any strain on that joint. Now I can get these 400 microfarads off as the negative end, because now I don't have to remember which value is what. They're all the same here. Very exciting to watch. Just a moment, I'll take a look back at the screen, see if I've missed any questions. Maybe I could get Siri to read them for me, but then I'd have to shoot Siri. I can't stand those voices. Though actually the one that I went for when I am forced to deal with Siri, the one I like is the woman with the British Indian accent. She sounds fantastic. The standard American Siri woman, and I'm not saying this to be misogynist, it's that particular woman's voice, I find very nagging. My wife always turns on directions, continue another 700 yards, then take the next right. I hate that. I just want to know, all right, I'm here in a quarter mile. I need to turn right past Mulberry Street, whatever it is. Certainly don't want to say another 300 yards. I mean, it's better that than meters, because no matter how much science I learn in my day job, I just cannot correlate meters to actual distances and grams to actual weights and stuff like that. I know. I'll watch David Attenborough documentaries and he'll say, it weighs 400 kilos. I'm like, is that impressive? Is that a lot? I never know. I'm not a scientist or a drug dealer, so I don't know. When I was a kid, I remember being told in first and second grade that soon we would all be switching to the metric system. And much hoopla was made, and none of us learned it, and no one ever did. And I think we were all told at the same time that we'd soon be all switching to Esperanto. The 70s were a hell of a time to be alive. I look at people with their disco get-ups for 70s theme parties and stuff like that. Is not the 70s I remember. Some tube socks, cut off husky or Wrangler jeans, some Keds, and a Mean Joe green t-shirt, and a Schwinn bicycle with no helmet. And I'm a happy 70s kid. Let's look at the screen now. What's a myth? 75 YBA. Break up more, that's a myth. Well, they have a higher gain factor, 12AX7s. So you're gonna get more gain out of the triode of a 12AX7 than you would with say a 5751, which is gain factor of 70, or a 12Y7, which is gain factor of like 40. So yeah, you'll get more breakup, but it's not because the tube is breaking up, it's because the tube is driving the next stage harder. So that stage will be more likely to break up. First BMX in the 80s. Yeah, I think we had BMX starting about 78, 79. But, I had my Schwinn with the banana seat and the streamers off the handlebars and the big chrome fender guards and all that stuff. And back then, cool things came in boxes of honeycomb, and honeycomb actually tasted good. They have changed that recipe. I tried some a couple years back. It tastes like crap now. It tastes like packing material. They used to be actually pretty good. That's not just overfond memories of 1977, 78. Man, the kids' shows they gave us, though. I tried it. My wife was born in 75, so she doesn't remember all the same stuff that I remember. 4 years makes a huge difference in awareness. But the stuff they gave us, all the Sid and Marty Krofft shows, psychedelic freakout that was presented to us as normal and how the world worked. Of course, as we've since learned, the world is much stranger and more dangerous place than a bunch of stone dudes in giant puppet costumes. All right, let's put these caps in place. I'm gonna do 2 silicone blobs at a time. I'm not using a lot of it because it only needs to hold it, and these don't have much mass. But if I put all 4 there, I'll end up getting it all over my fingers. So these are the MOD 500 volt 105 degree rated caps that I get from Seed Distribution. I held off on trying them for a while because the price is very, very low compared to F&Ts. F&Ts are made, I believe, in Switzerland. So there's going to be a bit of a price increase for that compared to almost anything. But, basically I was watching my other techs use them and report on them before any clients' apps. And all the reports I read from other techs that I respect were good. So I've been starting to use them. And the price is nice, but the performance seems absolutely fine. And the 105 degrees, on paper at least, is a nicer spec than the 85 degree rating of F&Ts. So I've never had any I've had one F&T failure in about 10 years of using them. So far, these MODs seem great. They're certainly better than current production Sprague atoms, which are very expensive. And inside the big blue plastic tube is a tiny little cap with no real specs given. And I've had failures with them out of the box or within a year or two. So I don't feel like paying $16 for something that may look like the old good ones, but don't sound or last like it. Now on these, I've made my bend over crimps for some mechanical support. Then I cut the excess off before soldering for two reasons. Number one, I'm heating up less metal, so it'll go faster even on this fairly large ground plane pour here. Second of all, I'm not going to be introducing any electromechanical shock into a solder joint, so it's not going to suddenly go grainy after I make that snip. All right, I already measured the bleed resistors there, the voltage balance resistors. If anyone's wondering, they're fine. I did some of the prep work on this before, but I wanted to measure those in case I needed to replace them. They're fine. Same way I'd cut the caps all at one end so I could pull them up and verify the values. Right here, I don't know if you can see this. I can't zoom in. Brad's got it all set up automated. There's a little ring on this one. This pin is beginning to break. This is a 2-pin multi-pin connector assembly that PV likes to use. And that one was beginning to have a broken solder joint. A little semicircle around that. Can't hurt to refill at that. Almost forgot to solder this one. That would have been embarrassing. A little bit of a gap in the solder there. All right, that all looks good. Not much excess flux there, but I'll go ahead and clean off a few bits just because it's good practice. Keeps me from getting lazy. And that was isopropyl alcohol. And you can buy the really pure stuff. And I think if you're doing a lot of computer level stuff, you should get the really pure stuff. Where are the paper towels go? I need to go get a new roll of paper towels from the basement and knock my light all over the place. Sorry about that. But for most of the electronics work I'm doing here, the 91% I can get at Walgreens or CVS, whatever. I'm not endorsing any particular chain drugstore. Anyway, the 91% you can get everywhere. It's sufficient for most of these purposes. All right, let me flip this back over here where it's going to go. Always easier to say than do. All right, that's all going to be pretty. Let's see what's happening in Comet's world. It's going to be used for Sick Doom riffage. No Freebird. I will not be playing Freebird. I do not like that band. It's complicated if you're a Southerner. Uh, Skinner has some negative associations. I never cared for it. I love the Allman Brothers. I don't do much with London power scaling. I do a lot of variable voltage for cathode bias amps because it's relatively simple to implement there without complicating things. If you're doing variable voltage London power scaling, that's a trademark term. In a fixed bias amp, it gets very complicated for two reasons. You also have to scale the bias as well as whatever node or nodes you're scaling. If you do the entire circuit in a fixed bias amp together, it can sound kind of anemic. If you split it, so say you're only doing the plates and screens and you're leaving else the same, you've got to put in a voltage clamp. Otherwise, your preamp voltage goes way high when your other voltage goes down. And it gets to be very, very expensive and introduces a lot of points of new failure. And honestly, compared to a really well implemented post-phase inverter, really well implemented post-phase inverter master volume, often referred to as the LARMR, the really high quality post-phase inverter master volume will usually sound 95% as good as power scaling, with many fewer components, causing many fewer issues that you have to make adjustments for, and simpler is almost always better. And on the subject of attenuators, if you have a 100-watt amp that you're constantly attenuating down to the level of a 5-watt amp, why do you have a 100-watt amp? There are certain amps that, say, a Marshall 100-watt Super Lead, one of the best clean sounds in the world. It's ungodly loud while doing that, but it's fantastic. But if you can't handle that volume, there's a lot of stuff that sounds really good at 20, 30 watts. A 30-watt amp, say an AC30 or a JTM45, is a very loud thing. So, I don't see amplifiers today as actually amplifying so much as they're tone generators. And if you can find a 20, 30-watt tone generator that gives you sufficient stage volume, that's all you need. So I would rather have a 20-watt amp with an efficient speaker and then an extension cab that I take for larger gigs than a 100-watt amp that I always had to attenuate. So, why do people buy? Well, let's see if this trans. Any thoughts on the Pisvane tubes out of China? Yeah, I've used quite a few of the new 12X7s. I've used a couple dozen at this point. I had one issue, and the vendor was great, Tube Depot. There were tubes that were absolutely fine for about a week in a super reverb, I believe. And then after about a week of playing time, a couple of them developed microphonics. And so they're not all great, but that could happen with tongue sols, all kinds of things, current production tubes. So I let the vendor know that that particular batch had a few that developed microphonics after a week or so of use. And that's hard to test for. It's hard you can't have a vendor test their tubes for 2 weeks, and it's really hard to duplicate microphonics on a tube tester. That fell down. So, I would say that so far they seem no worse than tongue sol and Muller reissues. They're not as prone to humming as the Electro-Harmonix 12AX7s. The Electro-Harmonix has the 12AX7 and they have the 7025. 7025 is gray lettering, the 12AX7 has yellow lettering. And I've had horrible hum and buzz noise issues with the 12AX7, the yellow labeled ones. While the gray labeled 7025 seem to be pretty good. And I have a sneaking suspicion that they are the same tube, and the ones that pass QA, really pass QA, get a 7025 silk screen and a higher price tag, and the rest of them are dumped on the market as just 12x7s. And if that sounds dastardly, that's what a lot of companies did even back in the good old days. But and JJ's tend to be very good too. For some reason, in the past 2 years or so, their 12x7s, the ECC 83s, seem to be strangely prone to breaking and losing vacuum, and they didn't used to be. Also, their 6v6S, which used to be a very reliable tube, and it's always been fun to have around because of the its high voltage capability. There's some fuzz there. I need to clean that off before I put that connector on. Have been, in the last 3-4 years, have been becoming extraordinarily microphonic and combo amps. Say, a deluxe reverb, which is a crazy place to use a 6v6. I know. So, it's not that JJ sucks, or EH sucks, or Tongue Sol is great, or Pisvane is great, or Pisvane sucks. As far as I can tell, they all go through batches of good and bad, sometimes indifferent. The best thing to do is have a relationship with a good vendor. So if you get a bad one, they'll swap it out for you. That's all we can do these days. 6-8 months ago, the best tube on the market was the tube that actually was on the market you could buy. Now we're beginning to have choices again, so that's nice. All right, so this end of things is all buttoned up. Let's see, 6v6S is your go-to. Good, I'm glad it's working well for you. It's been a big problem in combo amps for me. Let's see, looking at the comments here. I need new glasses. American Internet, it sucks. Is it getting weird looking again? Sorry, I've got really fast Comcast connection. Supposedly, it's supposed to be consistent, but I'm doing a iPhone to HDMI to computer to YouTube conversion. I'm not using a third-party chat live stream thing. So how do I get my app to you for repair? Thanks. Right now, you can't right now. I'm still working through a backlog. And while I'm still taking in things locally, I'm not having apps sent to me because I don't want to have such a crazy turnaround time and piss people off. So I've been declining some very nice apps I would love to work on just because I cannot guarantee to do it in any timely fashion. And I'm almost caught up, and I will open the floodgates again. But it's a hard thing. I hate turning away work, but I also don't like pissing people off. Excalibur 15 updates. Well, that's a fun one. I was all ready to go, and then COVID happened. And the guy who made my faceplates went out of business. And getting someone to do what I want at a quality level that I want at a price I can afford, because I'm not going to be ordering 1,000 of them, at least initially. People who will do 10 or 12 at a time. It's a small pool of people. I think I found a guy. I need to reach back out to him. That's the other thing when you're doing relatively small quantities. You're not going to be anyone's priority. But I think I found a guy to get the faceplates made again. And there's the first amp that's completed. That's kind of the prototype. And a second one is built up to the point where I can build it until I need the faceplates. So as soon as I get those faceplates, the second one will exist. And then I've got to do a couple of things before I can announce availability and pricing. First of all the pricing that I've done all kinds of math on to say, all right, what are the costs, what are the time, et cetera, what's a fair market price. all that has to be redone because all my costs will have increased in the past 2 years. Some exponentially. I've got to look at tube options. I had spec'd out certain tubes, some Russian-built 7189 EL84 heavy-duty tubes from the tube store. Well, they're Russian-made. They're not readily available right now, and those that are cost a hell of a lot more than they did 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, whatever it is now. Preamp tubes, gotta price those. The first two were built with Mercury Magnetics transformers. My buddy Patrick at Mercury sadly passed away in the interim. I have got to reach out to the new guy at Mercury and make sure that I'm still getting the right dealer tier pricing and see what the prices are, because I know that they will cost more than they did 2.5 years ago. Just nature of supply chain these days. And see if Mojo Tone has raised any of their prices on the chassis and cabs. Speakers have only gone up a small amount since I first quoted them. There's a period where all of the radio capacitors that I had designed the amp around were out of stock for months and months and months, and that was Nishicon, Rubicon, Panasonic, all the cons, all the big United Timcon. They were just all out of stock. There was such a huge crisis in the world chain supply. So I'm pretty sure all that stuff's available again, but I've got to confirm that part numbers haven't changed. It sounds like I'm complaining. I'm not, but it's hard bringing a product to market. Put in comparison, I am working out of my house. I have it's a nice room dedicated for this, and I've got professional gear here, but I'm one guy working out of this house. I want to bring an amp to market, and 2020 happened, and everything's gone crazy. I pre-ordered a Yamaha RevStar. Their new version. I ordered that 9-10 months ago. It's supposed to be here in June, then July, then October, and now they're saying sometime early next year. So if Yamaha, which is a fairly large company, a little bit larger than me, with more resources than I have, a much bigger gorilla as far as being able to make demands of suppliers and stuff, can't keep to their own schedule right now. It makes me feel a little bit better about having these problems. There's one other thing about the Excalibur that I am debating, and I'll go ahead and say it here, in that the original prototype and the second one built with the turret board and everything hand-wired is a very expensive amplifier. When you look at what a Princeton reverb actually sold for, or a twin reverb sold for in 1965, and then you adjust for inflation, you realize that those were always very expensive amplifiers. And the Excalibur 15, even though it's just a 15-watt amp, would be relatively expensive. And I have designed a very high quality PCB for that circuit. It would have the preamp tubes board mounted. The power amp tubes would not be board mounted, they'd be chassis mounted. The pots, with the exception of the treble and bass pots, would all be chassis. Those two pots and a couple of switches would be on a little daughter board. But so a very high quality PCB without any of the points of failure of cheap PCBs. And that would let me give people a really good sounding amp for a lot less money and make quite a few more of them, because not only, one of the reasons they're expensive to build is, just to buy, is they're very time consuming to make. And I've had all these other things I need to do with amp repairs and such. So I don't know whether it's going to be, cleaning the sockets while I'm at it. I don't know whether I'm going to switch to a PCB version and piss off some of the purists who've been like, wow, that's beautiful with the turrets and everything, or whether I'm going to offer both, in which case I've got to make some adjustments to my plan for the hand-wired version. And those would cost a lot more because I have made some changes to the circuit, some options that the PCB for the switches and stuff made very easy to do. It's very easy to populate a small PCB, solder two switches to it, and have everything be very neat and reliable. If you're hand wiring all that, it's harder to get the components attached to that switch with good mechanical connections, and it can take 2 hours to properly wire 5 switches. Look at that. What was the amp that came in with all the crazy wiring attached to a switch at the front and had to come out? I don't remember. I had an amp a couple months back, and all the components in the world were just floating around attached to a switch, and the switch was loose, and it was really hard to attach and had to be disconnected to pull the board. You don't want to get into that situation. So I don't know whether I'm going to say, I'm going with this PCB because I believe in it and that's all you get, or whether I'll say, yeah, I'll be glad to hand wire you one. Totally different price range. Interested in people's thoughts on that. I don't want to be boutique unobtainium. Let's see what people are saying there now. What RevStar model? Let's go back there. Yeah. The RSS standard, the one with the P90s. Let's see. Hand traced PCB. No. Hand traced PCBs are a great place to add error. Everything is very professionally laid out on and I'm using up to 4 millimeter wide traces for certain ground connections, and everything's 2-ounce copper pour. When I get there, I'll talk about that, but nothing by hand. Everything precise. Let's see. Reliable and easy to repair. Absolutely. Flux can be corrosive. Yeah, that's why I like to get off. Honestly, I'd rather pay more for a quality built product that lasts forever. Well, a good PCB is that. I mean, it just is. It's hard when you're self-employed. Amen. Consumer education for some. Yeah, random task. That's one of the things I'm really trying to struggle with. When I did the review of the Friedman app, it made me realize that people had not understood what I was saying about other amps out there. For instance, the one guy said, "Oh yeah, the same stuff you say that's nice about Dave's amp, you're just saying it because it's Dave. It's the same stuff you hate in other amps," which made me realize that people thought I had just been shitting on PCBs, and what was good in Dave's amp is the same thing that was bad in Fender's amp, in that you have quick connects for a heater connection. Well, let's take a deluxe reverb reissue, for example. That's pretty underrated quick connects going to a very small, a very thin trace on the single-sided trace on a board. It was not a 2-ounce copper pour. That was a full ounce. And then providing current to a pair of 6V6s, which draw quite a bit more current than a pair of EL84s. And the same thing is done on all other Fender amps, up to a quad of 6L6s. So very flimsy traces to carry the heater current for 4 6L6s or 2 6V6s. versus on Dave's where you had a 2 ounce copper pour, much heavier duty terminals for the quick connects, a very short path for those heater connections to the EL84s, which draw less current. So I was showing that what Dave had done was a financial concession in that he was using quick connects, but at no cost of reliability because he had factored in current and his traces were nice and wide and everything was fine. But yeah, Jason makes really good stuff there. But I realized that when people had seen my previous comments on fenders, all they took away was PCBs are bad. It wasn't the specific aspects of bad PCB my focus. So getting a replacement PCB in 20 years from you could be problematic. Well, it could be. I'll be 71 and probably uh, uh, done working. But one of the things I'm doing on the PCB is designing it. It won't need to be replaced. The stream will be on YouTube later. Once it's done and live, I'll put it all up there. Um, wow. Yeah, Saldano, Steve Fryatt, Dave Friedman, John Suhr. There are a lot of very good apps with PCBs out there. Um, it's just that the ones that feature in most people's lives are the cheaper ones. You know, the best way to put it, when you look at a Fender reissue that costs $1,000 new, well, that amp costs the builder probably $250, $300. The rest of it's profit and dealers and distribution and they have a lot of overhead. It's fair, but you're looking, and that's not just let's say Fender. It's if you look at 10 different amps under $1,000, they're all going to be cutting corners somewhere. Some cut corners more. And it's one of the reasons in the amps under 1,000 and amps under 500 videos, I chose the DSL 40C and the AC15 custom series because they cut fewer corners. I think that the AC15 custom series is better built. Uh, I think that the DSL 40 offers a wider range of sounds and has an effects loop. So, I offered both as options. Yeah, getting silicone off a PCB, a razor blade will do it. Anyway, the PCB I'm designing designed. Um, I'm designing it to be very easy to service, so that if you needed to change the caps in 20 years, you would remove 6 screws, remove the preamp tubes, disconnect 2 wires, which are filament supplies, and the entire board will flip up, and a tech can have access to everything on there. And very large pads, through hole plated, almost as reliable as a Fender eyelet board, though it'll never become conductive. But in terms of the physical eyelets, that amp should never have any drastic failure. Just should never. The things in the amp that would go wrong that might burn things would either be a dropping resistor, which will be overrated for the wattage and current and high off the board, or something going wrong at an output tube socket. Those would be Belton output tube sockets mounted to the chassis, easy to replace. All that stuff's hand wired. So, I'd like to see an amp with an EQ bypass. Most don't do that. Yeah, there are a lot that do. It's not always that great. A lot of the more recent Dr. Z's have their boost switch, and that lifts the tone stack. I do a modified approach to that on some of the Voxes I do, but I'm not doing a full lift. Vox has done full lifts, and it doesn't sound very good. But when you lift the tone stack completely, you can introduce some real ugly qualities. I think it's often, not always, but often kind of like, doesn't that sound cool at Guitar Center on Saturday morning? Someone will buy the amp because of that. But in practice, it's like, okay, the amp sounds pretty good here, and then it's louder and distorted, but it really doesn't sound great. Sometimes an overdrive pedal is a better choice. I don't know if James did the butcher. I think the VTM he definitely did. The VTM is a lot of really good ideas realized in a very fragile way. Uh, you know, all those little bitty dip switches, they don't last. The whole thing is built very shoestring. They sound great when they're working. Speaking of sounding great when they're working, let's get those caps in here. Those four threads. All right, where did I put those? Here, we got a big old bag of them. All right. Would I consider selling the boards with no support? No, I'm not going to sell the boards. Nope. If you buy an amp, if you want an amp that says Psionic Audio, you get Psionic Audio built in. I'm not going to have my brand representing who knows what level of quality. You know, I don't see how people who do the kits handle either the time spent doing support, answering all the phone calls and emails, and here's how to hold a soldering iron, taking the risk. And I've spoken to Jason about this, and you say you get someone out there does a horrible job, man, it sounds like a dog. And other musicians hear it, and it says head first. Personally, I would not care for that. All right, so that's how much they get bent. So I want to have, I want to offer something good to people, but also want to control what the thing actually is. Branding is a crucial thing. Actually, my wife teaches branding. She's a professor of graphic design and advertising. So branding is a big thing for her. And if you like the look of Excalibur 15, she had a lot of input into the general thing. She sees a lot of the amps that come in. She's like, oh my God, they need a lot of really crappy panel layouts and ugly font combinations. Topography is important. What kind of rectifier I'm going to use in the Excalibur 15? The first one's got an Easy 81, just like a Vox AC15 from 62 did. Subsequent one, the second one built, and subsequent ones are going to have solid state rectifier with what people consider sag built into it. So it's going to give the voltage drop that you would get with an Easy 81 without the heat of an Easy 81, without the proclivity for failure that an Easy 81 has. One less thing to go wrong, one less big source of heat, and on a cathode biased amp like an AC15 or the Excalibur 15. Sag is a weird thing. When you look at how the amp behaves, it actually draws its most current at idle. You can look at an AC15 as either never sagging or always sagging. So a lot of the stuff you read out there on the internet about rectifiers and sag and such, first of all, most of it's very overinflated. Second of all, they're usually describing Bassman or JTM 45s. But there's just so much mythology out there. What was it? There's a very popular video right now, tested. Where does tone come from in an amp? I think that's what it's called. And I want to be very clear that I'm not crapping on that guy or criticizing that guy. I think he has some very valid questions. Not sure he came to the right conclusions, but he was trying. And most of the examples he got was answers he got on forums, How does this work? How does that work? What does this sound like? What does this sound like? And, he got the same, sometimes good, sometimes bad, many times, most of the time, incomplete information from those forums that you get and asking what kind of string should I use. I don't want to get into a reputation of his video, and I'd be glad to talk to him about it. But there are a lot of combination of factors. It's never just one thing. That's kind of like saying his Porsche is faster than your Camry because the Porsche has red leather interior. And there are a lot of things like that in our crazy guitar tone search world where people think that the brown caps and the dark blue caps in late 60s and 70s Fenders don't sound as good as the blue Ajax caps from, say, 63 to 69. Caps sound absolutely fine. There's no real difference in the sound of the caps. But other things happened during that same period that did change, which affect the sound of the amp. A lot of it is just the wiring length that they used and the kind of wire that they started to use. But most people don't recognize those things, or they're not going to understand that, oh, they went from a 500 picofarad or 1,000 picofarad input cap on the phase inverter with 1 meg grid leaks and 100K and 82K plates to 10 nanofarad and 330Ks and dual 47Ks. They're not going to understand that, but they will say, hey, this amp sounds better. This one's got brown caps. This one's got the blue molded caps. Blue molded caps sound better. And at some level, I think that tested what makes amps sound different video has some of the same understandable fallacies. And I'm not slamming the guy, and I'm not dismissing everything he said. Some of the stuff he said is absolutely true, but he was also giving very short samples that would not show that much at all. You know, you could have 200-watt Marshalls from 1972. On paper, they'd be the same amp. If you play them, they would usually sound different from each other a little bit. But you're not necessarily going to hear that in a 3-second burst. Anyway, I'm afraid that if I continue to talk about that, it'll get misinterpreted or misconstrued, or that it'll be seen as either me attacking the guy or trying to glom on to his sudden popularity. That video's gotten a lot of views. Oh, you're just jealous, or you just want to get people to look at your video. No, that's not a game I want to play. I don't care. So meanwhile, life goes on. This amp has got a weird little thing in it. Let me put it back in place. We're gonna put it to the side.